of Michael Ashburner. So everything we do here starts with Michael. So he created the Gene Ontology. He had all the ideas which then became settled science within the course of the next 10 or 20 years. He's sitting in front of Alex and Susie Lewis, who will also play an important role in what I'm going to say next. Susie Lewis was his lieutenant. She walked around in front of him making sure that the ground was cleared. And then somebody is sticking his finger up my nose. But this is from the Sequence Ontology meeting in 2007, which was one of several meetings that were organized around the National Center for Biomedical Ontology, in which we built the bits and pieces of the Obo Foundry. One of these meetings was held at the ISMB in 2005, where Michael and Susie gave a lecture about how to build ontologies. And I'm going to, I think it was a tutorial. I'm going to give you some slides from this tutorial because they will illustrate how Michael at that time was already thinking in terms of services associated with ontologies, which is what this talk is about. So these are Michael's and Susie's slides. What do you do when you need an ontology? Well, you go through this flowchart, and you'll see that the flowchart ends in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you can't think of anything else, then you talk to me. So first of all, you evaluate what exists. Is there a community of ontologists already working on your problem? What domain exactly does their work cover? Is it private? Is it active? And so on. So that's the survey. That's the first stage. And then you do background research. So you assess the ontologies critically. You try not to invent something new. You try to collaborate. And if you do start building, then you do it with other people, not in isolation. And then you make sure that what you do is public. So ontologies, like science, are never private. There is no private science. At that time, there were proprietary ontologies. People thought they could make money with ontologies, and drug companies were making ontologies of their own. And Michael was sometimes allowed to see these ontologies, and he came back and told us they were all crap. Building public ontologies helps to contribute to the quality of the ontologies. That will be important for what follows. And then ontologies must be shared, just as scientific theories must be shared. And the computable representation of the ontologies must be shared. And then there is the issue of application. So an ontology which exists only on paper or only as a computer file is not a good ontology. The way an ontology becomes good is by being aggressively applied to instances of data, and it gets better and better. This is the virtuous snowball effect. Ontologies improve by being used to annotate data, because then you get feedback from the people who are doing the data annotation, and the feedback helps you fix holes in your ontology and to fix errors in your ontology. Finally, there is the necessary counterpart of the people reporting errors, which is that there are people responding to those reports and fixing the errors. And Michael formulates this as follows: does a warm body answer help mail within 2 days? And that, I believe, is still the rule within the Gene Ontology, that they have a help desk which receives a lot of queries, and they have a guarantee that there will be a response within 48 hours. This is a Go service. It's a service to the community. The help desk helps people to answer queries about the Go. And all of the ontologies in the Obo Foundry have a similar service. So there is the product, which is the Go itself, the ontology, and then there is a service. Another service is to create updates. And there are, if you list them, a lot of services provided by the Go. So they provided an Obo Edit, which was a simple editing tool for ontologies. They provided a portal. They provided permanent URIs so that the ontology would be sustainable over time. As the Obo Foundry was established in around 2004, further services began to be provided. So now we had an open portal. Actually, the Obo Library pre-existed the Obo Foundry. And the Obo Library provided the service of enabling people to find easily existing ontology content. because this was the Dark Ages, before we had all of the things before we had Björn. The ontology was a relatively small-scale activity. It was a cottage industry, and people didn't know where to find ontologies. The Obo library made it easy to find ontologies, because you could say, well, where do I find an ontology with material about proteins? Well, in the protein ontology. And then the Obo library, Obo Foundry architecture of modules within a hub and spokes structure allowed a division of labor. So people could work on the protein ontology, other people could work on the cell ontology, and so on. And they worked together, but the labor was divided, the authority was divided, the motivation was divided, and this proved to be a very successful way of working. So successful that it's being copied. So it's being copied in the military, it's being copied in industry, and we are building at the moment, and this is a NIST organized endeavor, something called the Industrial Ontologies Foundry. And in working with the industry on developing ontologies to support interoperability between different companies, I'm learning things that I think are relevant to the way we understand what we're doing in the biomedical ontology field. And that's what this talk is about. So in the industrial world, there is a lot of interest in what is called a product service system. And we can illustrate the impact of this idea by looking at GE. GE makes engines, but it doesn't sell aircraft engines. I'm talking about now. It doesn't sell aircraft engines anymore. It rents them. And it charges for the use of the engines per hour of flying time. Now what this means is that GE has to make sure that the engines are flying a lot. This means that the GE has to ensure that the engines don't break. If GE sells the engines, it needn't care what happens to them once they've been delivered to the customer. It's the customer's responsibility to keep them in flying state. Airworthiness, they call it. But if GE owns the engines and earns money only if they're flying, then GE is responsible for making sure that they're well maintained. And that's a service. GE sells a service. The service is the service of maintaining the engines to minimize downtime. And this means that GE is now incentivized to collect lots of data about how engines are performing their purpose. And so they've created a huge infrastructure which follows every engine. An engine will typically have 100 sensors inside it, which is collecting data constantly, sending the data back to GE. GE is analyzing those data and working out ways of predicting failure, and then sending in maintenance engineers who collect more data in order to keep the engine airworthy and never have downtime, which is not predicted for maintenance purposes. So this changes the way engines work. It makes them more long-lasting. It means that they break less. It means that they get better in design, because GE takes the lessons they learn from tracking the use of engines which exist now to design better versions of those engines in the next iteration. So Rolls-Royce does the same thing, and they advertise that they don't sell engines anymore, they sell thrust. All right, so products become a delivery mechanism for services. Now you are interested in the whole life cycle of the product, not just in selling it and then saying goodbye. And this means that you need to be involved with the consumers of your product from the very start. You want to know what services they need. And there is a kind of closed loop. And this closed loop I described in the engine case. You want to follow the life of the product so that you can design new products which will serve the customer even better. And this idea, of course, is applied now in other parts of industry, including in digital manufacturing. So IBM Watson is provided free. It's a vehicle to get people interested in having services from IBM consultants. In the engineering world, they have been developing ontologies for product services systems. And I think that we should be thinking about ontologies also from the perspective of understanding ontologies themselves as product service systems. This ontology for product service systems is based on BFO. And I think BFO is a product service system. I think it's been a product service system from the very beginning. So BFO developers, and I'm doing it now, I'm offering a service. BFO developers help users of BFO to use it. They help them to formulate definitions. We are helping people in industry now to re-engineer their ontologies so that they conform to BFO, so that they can fit into the I/O foundry. BFO itself is a reverse engineering of the Gene Ontology. So the BFO top level is just the three ontology kinds needed to fit the three ontologies which make up the Gene Ontology. And we provide portals, we provide an issue tracker, we provide manuals, training services. We help people to negotiate border treaties where they have an overlapping interest. We update our ontology content, but most importantly, we get angry at people when they misuse BFO. And we need to work on having more angry people. In my old age, I'm becoming too ironic. I'm nice sometimes. And that's a bad thing. So unless you have that, there will never ever be interoperability, because people will get lazy, they'll go off and do the wrong thing. The reason why Esperanto failed as a universal language is because as soon as people started teaching it to their children, family dialects of Esperanto started to be formed. And so the whole thing became a fractal decay of multiple dialects. The more successful we are, the more there is the danger of family dialects. The underlying idea here is that the oboe foundry will work only if we have ontology sustainability. We will have ontology sustainability only if we provide ontology services. One way to provide ontology services effectively, economically, is to create ontology suites like the oboe foundry. And just as large enterprises are more sustainable than small enterprises, so large suites of ontologies, I would argue, are more sustainable than single boutique ontologies of the sort which used to be developed in the olden days. So here are some examples of ontology suites. The original version of OBO was actually called GOBO, Global Open Biomedical Ontologies. They dropped the G. The suite ontologies I'll talk about a little bit. They are also an old suite which is still alive, originally founded by the Jet Propulsion Lab. And then there is the Marine Metadata Ontology Initiative, which is also quite long-lasting, but which I won't talk about because I can't detect any life in it, and maybe I'm just not looking in the right places. And then there are the Common Core ontologies, which I will just mention in passing. Suite, Semantic Web for Earth and Environmental Terminology. Developed by the Jet Propulsion Lab, doesn't have a top level. It has just a series of small, light ontologies. It was used for some years by the Jet Propulsion Lab. It still exists. It doesn't have a top level. There is no top level in Suite. Very few Suite terms have human readable annotations, so there are no definitions, practically speaking. All of that is bad news for Suite. This is an example of what you get if there is no shock and awe. They say that time is essentially a numerical scale with terminology specific to the temporal domain. Now that is both wrong and it's circular. And in the oboe foundry now, we do better than that. One piece of good news about Suite is that they're talking to Chris about an alignment with oboe. And so this is a sign that there is still life. However, the Jet Propulsion Lab no longer maintains Suite, which is a sort of bad sign. The Common Core ontologies were built using the BFO here in Buffalo, and they are, I think, an illustration of the right way to build a suite. And we are now, as of 2 days ago, exploring the possibilities of alignment of the Common Core ontologies with Obo Foundry. The domain of the Common Core ontologies is, roughly speaking, everything, but divided into modules according to needs that people have. The ontologies in the Common Core are just the top 2 boxes, and then the rest are what we call extension ontologies. If you have a suite, then you need a top-level hub to organize a suite, and there are 2 top-level hubs that people consider nowadays, namely DOLCE and BFO. And there was quite an intense decision procedure organized by NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to determine which ontology should be the top level for industrial ontologies. Foundry, it took 6 months. There were 43 questions, 40 people doing the study. They evaluated the 2 ontologies independently. We have a huge spreadsheet of the scores on each of 43 dimensions, and BFO won. Now, why did DOLCE lose? I think the first reason is that DOLCE does not have an ontologically realist basis. It sees ontology as representing cultural imprints and social conventions. So it's trying to capture the ontological categories lying behind natural language and human common sense, not the terminological architecture of scientific theories, which is what BFO tries to do. So correspondingly, there are many variants of DOLCE because there are many cultural imprints. Now, there is only one official version of DOLCE since 2002, but there are many variants, and that causes confusion and breaks the goal of having a single hub which will be maintained constantly through very careful updates over time, which is what we try to achieve with BFO. Another reason why DOLCE failed is because they are friendly. They like people. They like people to experiment and do different things. It's fun. And so we are proud to see so many people using DOLCE as an inspiration for their own ontology. That is not the right attitude if you want to achieve interoperability. You should go with a machine gun to shoot people who use your ontology wrongly, which is what most people did. I mean, not the machine guns, the wrong use. Another problem for DOLCE was the funding model. So they funded DOLCE through European Union and Italian government short-term projects. And there is a list of projects here, there are 27 projects, I believe. This is exactly what you should do. You should maintain your projects online, keep track of the ontologies developed. But if you go to this page of projects, you find that there are only 5 working links. 22 of the links are either broken or misdirected. And of the 5 which do work, only 2 actually point to anything relevant to DOLCE. So they have no social memory. They are not taking care to keep track of the work involved in using their own ontology. Where BFO ontologies, we try to keep track of what's created. Now, there is one exception to what seems to be the rule, that DOLCE did not lead to sustainable ontology suites. This is hydrology. It seems that there are a number of mutually consistent hydrology ontologies which are of high quality, so I can recommend them. But in other areas where DOLCE was used, in the European projects that I described, areas such as economics, law, industrial design, services, that was a topic which led to ontologies being developed by DOLCE people. Those ontologies were one-off cottage industry ontologies. Even if you had a number of ontologies relating to different areas of the law, they were developed independently. They don't fit together. Or you can't find them, and so you can't check whether they fit together. All right, so there are 3 reasons for the failure of DOLCE. One is no realist foundation. Another is the wrong funding model. And don't ask me what the right funding model is. And the third one is the irenic temperament. That means they are too friendly, too open. So now I will conclude with some illustrations of how the closed loop works. So in manufacturing, This is this is a fragment of a manufacturing ontology. We have manufacturing processes which have output product, and then we have service provision which support the use of the product. And an example of service provision would be a maintenance process. The input of the maintenance process is a product, and the output is the very same product, just better. A repair has been made, it's been cleaned, whatever it might be. Now, interestingly, we can look at standards development also from this product service perspective. And one way of ensuring sustainability is to have your ontology become an international standard. So a standards development organization has as its output standards. And then they have service provision. One service provision which the ISO standard brings is certification. We can now certify people as having expertise required to build a BFO conformant ontology, just as other ISO standards led to certification in relation to other sorts of expertise. And this is very useful to ensure consistency, and we just need to find a way to build into the certification process the ability to communicate shock and awe. And then science itself is a product service industry. So the products of science are theories, and the services are testing those theories in experiments. And another service is training people who will be the next generation of scientists. And then finally, ontologies. The product is an ontology, which is a digital product, and the services are things like update in order to support the scientific community. And now, to see how this works for the closed loop, we have an enterprise which is, as in the case of GE, maintaining its own products, which has output maintenance data. The maintenance data can serve as input to a maintenance process outcome evaluation, which has output maintenance process outcomes data, which are inputs to a redesign of the product so that the failures caused in the earlier design can be avoided in the new design. And that creates a closed loop. It's a closed loop which is a bit more complicated because we're going all the way back to the beginning of the design process. In the ontology case, we have a similar closed loop. So the ontology editors review an ontology and create review data, and then that review data serves as input to a process of revising that ontology, which leads to a new version of the ontology, which starts the loop once again. So this is the closed loop process which brings about the virtuous snowball, which improves ontologies over time. And as I say, it's not just a circle, it's more like this is aircraft maintenance. It's more like this. But you can study this while we have the questions, since I'm done.